My name is Julian Hayes, and at 28, anyone looking at my life would probably call me fortunate. From where I stand, it's easy to see why. I'm in my corner office at Apex Digital Capital, a space enclosed by floor-to-ceiling glass that offers an unobstructed, breathtaking view of San Francisco. Below me, the city's lights glitter like a fallen constellation, a universe I helped build. As a lead strategist, I played a pivotal role in catapulting Apex from a top 5 player to the absolute monarch of the fintech sector, even managing to eclipse my own family's dynasty, Hayes Global Investments. But this triumphant version of me is a recent creation. If you were to travel back just a few years, you would find a very different Julian. You would see a boy raised in the perpetual chill of favoritism, born into a wealthy family where love was a commodity, measured against a distorted set of expectations and blatant partiality. Our family home was a cavernous 3-story mansion in Presidio Heights, one of the city's most exclusive neighborhoods, its glass walls offering a sterile, postcard-perfect vista of the bay. From the outside, we looked like the embodiment of success. Our home was a constant stage for extravagant wine tastings and catered affairs. A fleet of Rolls-Royces sat gleaming in the garage, polished symbols of my parents' success. Robert and Catherine Hayes were the celebrated power couple, the brilliant minds steering Hayes Global Investments, which was, at the time, the leading fintech corporation in the country. But the polished facade couldn't hide the cracks forming within. The reality of our family life was far colder and less brilliant than the massive Swarovski crystal chandelier that dominated our entryway. I shared my childhood, my face, and even my DNA with my twin brother Ethan. We were a perfect mirror image of each other. The same dark brown hair, the same deep-set blue eyes, the same lopsided smile that appeared whenever stress got the better of us. Yet to our parents, we might as well have been strangers. They viewed us through 2 entirely different and unequal prisms. From the moment he could talk, Ethan was designated the golden child, the future, the heir apparent. He was their son. He was born with a natural charisma, a silver-tongued charm that could captivate a room instantly. From his earliest years, he knew exactly how to draw a booming laugh from our father with a perfectly timed joke, or make our mother's eyes light up by presenting her with a ridiculously oversized bouquet on her birthday. And I was his shadow. I lacked that easy gift for conversation. Smooth talking felt foreign and clumsy on my tongue. While Ethan held court, I would retreat to a quiet corner, my world shrinking to the satisfying logic of numbers on a screen. I found my comfort there in analyzing market charts or losing myself in the dense financial strategy books our father would leave scattered on his study table. That was my language, the only one I felt fluent in. But in my parents' eyes, that just made me the intelligent but uninspired older twin, the one who supposedly lacked the essential qualities of a leader. A familiar tight fist would clench around my heart every time I heard that judgment spoken or implied. Over the years, I simply learned to breathe through the pressure, to swallow the ache until it became a dull, manageable throb. The memory of one Christmas party when I was 15 is seared into my mind. Our entire mansion was glowing, bathed in the warm golden light of 100 candles, the air thick with the festive scent of fresh pine and spiced gingerbread. A powerful crowd had assembled in our main living area. The CEOs, investors, and key partners of Hayes Global Investments, all holding glistening wine glasses and exchanging pleasantries. I watched as my father, Robert, clapped a hand on Ethan's shoulder and drew him into the center of the room. He presented him to the assembly not just as his son, but as the indisputable future star of the company. Ethan, looking effortlessly confident in a bright red sweater and a broad smile, launched into an animated story about persuading a classmate to go all in on a mock stock portfolio. His delivery was flawless. The punchline landed and the room erupted in a wave of appreciative laughter, and there I was, tucked away in a corner, my hands wrapped around a lukewarm glass of apple cider. I watched the entire performance unfold, feeling less like a member of the family and more like a ghost haunting the edges of the celebration. Invisible. Across the crowded room, my mother's eyes met mine for a fleeting second. She offered a small, almost apologetic smile. It wasn't one of encouragement, but of something else. Pity, perhaps. It did nothing to close the vast distance between us. "Julian, why don't you try to say something?" she mouthed, her expression strained. "You should learn from your brother." Feeling the weight of her expectation, I stammered out a few words about a market analysis I had recently studied. My voice was barely a mumble. She gave a polite, distracted nod, her attention already drifting back to the more interesting conversations around her. She turned away without another word. My father, standing beside Ethan, didn't even glance in my direction. The next morning, Christmas Day, Ethan was presented with a brand new limited edition Rolex from our parents. His reward for winning a school-wide speech competition. I received a gift as well. It was a well-worn book on finance management, one my father had pulled from his own bookshelf. "This suits you," he said, his voice completely devoid of warmth or enthusiasm. It was a statement, not a gift. I forced a smile and thanked him, but the moment I was back in the solitude of my room, I hurled the book against the wall. The sound of it hitting the plaster was a small, satisfying crack in the silence. It was never about the monetary value of the present. It was about the cold, dismissive look in their eyes, a look that told me clear as day that I simply wasn't worthy of the attention, the pride, the effortless love that they showered on Ethan. This blatant favoritism bled into every aspect of our lives. Ethan was the one who accompanied our parents to exclusive business galas and high-stakes meetings, events I would only learn about later through whispers and second-hand accounts. On our 16th birthday, Ethan was handed the keys to a gleaming new Porsche. My gift was a used bicycle and a lecture about the virtues of independence. Despite all this, I never truly hated Ethan. How could I? He was my brother, my twin. He was the one who would sneak into my room late at night, long after our parents were asleep, to split a stolen Snickers bar under the covers, our quiet laughter muffled by my pillow. But with every lavish compliment they paid him, with every extravagant privilege they bestowed upon him, the hollow space inside my chest grew a little wider, a little colder. The questions echoed in the quiet of my mind, a relentless loop of self-doubt. What did I do wrong? Why am I not good enough for them? My grandmother, Eleanor, was the sole beacon of light during those shadowed years. She resided in a modest, beautiful home in Napa Valley, nestled among acres of rolling vineyards. Every summer, Ethan and I were shipped off to stay with her. While Ethan spent his days running wild through the gardens or glued to his video games, I found my sanctuary at the kitchen table with Grandma, listening to her tell stories. She had been a financial journalist back in her day, a trailblazer who had carved out a formidable career in a world dominated by men in tailored suits and silk ties. She was fierce and brilliant. "You're just like me, you know," she would often say, her hand gently ruffling my hair. "You're smart, you're patient, but you're not a showman. The fire inside of you will burn brighter than anyone expects, Julian," she'd tell me, her eyes twinkling with a certainty that I desperately needed. "But it won't be because someone else lit it for you. You're going to be the one to strike the match." On those sun-drenched Napa afternoons, I would sit on her weathered porch, completely captivated as she recounted the stories of legendary entrepreneurs who had clawed their way up from nothing, from Henry Ford to Oprah Winfrey. She pressed books into my hands, classics like The Intelligent Investor by Benjamin Graham, and we would spend hours dissecting investment strategies, debating market theories. "People might not recognize your value right now," she would tell me, her gaze sharp and unwavering. But listen to me. Real worth doesn't need applause or validation from anyone. It's forged in what you build when no one is watching. Her words were a lifeline, a small, persistent flame she ignited within me, keeping me anchored and sane through the long years of being invisible in my own home. When I entered high school, I poured all my energy into the business and investment clubs, arenas where my skills could finally be judged on their own merit, free from the constant crushing comparison to Ethan. It paid off. I led my team to a first-place victory in a national financial planning competition. The investment model I designed and built managed to grow our mock company's portfolio by an astonishing 200% in just 6 months. I carried that heavy trophy home, my heart pounding with a fragile hope that this, finally, would be enough to earn their pride. But when I presented it to my father, he offered only a cursory nod. "Good job," he said, his eyes already drifting toward a stack of papers on his desk. "But don't let these little competitions distract you. The company needs leaders, Julian, not just number crunchers." His words landed like stones, shattering my small moment of triumph. My mother, preoccupied with reviewing a draft of Ethan's speech for an upcoming charity gala, barely looked up. "Just put the trophy on the shelf, Julian," she instructed, her tone dismissive. "Don't clutter up the living room." That was the turning point. I got a part-time job at a small, scrappy fintech startup in the city, where I dove headfirst into learning basic coding and the intricacies of market data analysis. Every evening, I would bike home through the quiet streets, the yellow glow of the streetlights illuminating my path. I'd arrive drenched in sweat, exhausted, but filled with a strange, unfamiliar sense of joy. At that office, I wasn't Ethan's brother, I wasn't the backup. They simply called me Julian. I was the guy who spotted a critical bug in the company's new payment processing system, the one whose suggestion for optimizing a workflow ended up saving them thousands of dollars. For the first time in my life, I felt truly seen. I felt valued. But even that small spark of recognition couldn't completely burn away the long shadow Ethan cast over my life. One evening when I was 17, I was walking past my father's study when I overheard my parents' voices. The door was slightly ajar and my father's words cut through the silence, cold and clear as glass. "Ethan is the future of Hayes Global Investments. He has the charisma, the vision. Julian is smart, yes, but he's just a backup plan, a safety net." My mother's voice was softer, but her agreement was just as sharp. "Julian will be fine," she said. "He always figures things out on his own." I stood frozen in the hallway, the blood draining from my face. Their words echoed in the sudden ringing silence of my ears. A backup plan, a safety net. That's all I would ever be to them. My hands clenched into fists so tight they trembled, and my heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. Backup. The word seared itself into my brain, a wound that I knew even then would never fully heal. I turned and fled back to my room, slamming the door behind me with a force that rattled the frame. I stared at my reflection in the mirror. Messy hair, exhausted eyes, but deep within them I saw it. A flicker, the very spark that Grandma Eleanor had always talked about. "Fine," I told myself, my own voice a harsh whisper in the quiet room. "If I'm just a backup, then I'll become the best damn backup they have ever seen." That night, I tore a piece of paper from a notebook and furiously scribbled down my new life's mission. Get into Stanford, stand on my own 2 feet, and prove to them and to myself that I didn't need their validation to succeed. I would forge my own path. I had no way of knowing then that just a few short months later, my parents would make a decision so devastating it would shatter the fragile world I had built for myself. But in doing so, they would also unknowingly ignite that small spark into a raging fire of determination. one more fierce than I ever could have imagined. In the spring of our senior year of high school, both Ethan and I submitted our applications to Stanford University. We both declared our intention to major in economics and financial technology. It was the only path that made sense. It was a dream I had been carefully nurturing ever since Grandma Eleanor had first put those books about world-changing entrepreneurs into my hands. I could vividly picture myself walking through Stanford's hallowed lecture halls, absorbing knowledge from the world's most brilliant minds, and finally decisively proving that I was more than just a safety net. I worked relentlessly to earn my place. I maintained a perfect 4.0 GPA, racked up awards in every financial planning competition I entered, and spent countless nights teaching myself programming languages to deepen my practical understanding of fintech. I poured every ounce of my being into my Stanford scholarship essay, writing about my solitary, self-taught journey and the deep, abiding passion I had discovered in the elegant logic of numbers and strategy. When the acceptance email from Stanford finally arrived, a raw shout of pure joy escaped my lips. I clutched my phone, my hands shaking as I dialed Grandma Eleanor's number. "I did it, Grandma," I managed to say, my voice thick with unshed tears. I got in. I could hear the smile in her voice as she laughed, a warm, comforting sound. "I never doubted you for a second, Julian." Ethan was accepted as well. His academic record was less impressive, a 3.4 GPA and no notable awards to his name. But he possessed that undeniable charisma, and his application essay had been professionally polished by an expensive admissions consultant our parents had hired. Still, we were both in. We were going to Stanford, or so I thought. I wasn't surprised when he erupted in a whoop of joy, immediately calling everyone he knew to share the news. What I didn't expect, what I never could have prepared for, was how swiftly my own elation would be snuffed out at a fateful family dinner just a few days later. It was a Saturday evening, and our Presidio Heights mansion was aglow with that familiar warm golden light. The long, polished oak dining table was laid out with thick-cut steaks and an expensive red wine, the vintage my parents reserved for what they deemed special occasions. I sat directly across from Ethan, forcing a smile onto my face as our mother casually inquired about our college plans. I was just about to bring up the merit scholarship I had applied for when my father raised a hand, a gesture that commanded immediate silence. "We need to discuss the matter of tuition," he announced. His tone clipped and serious. My heart began to beat a little faster. I knew, of course, that our family was immensely wealthy. Stanford's tuition fee was practically pocket change for Hayes Global Investments. But the way my father looked first at Ethan, his expression softening with pride, and then glanced at me with those cold, appraising eyes, filled me with a familiar, sinking dread. "Ethan," my father began, his voice resonating with authority, "your mother and I have decided to cover your full tuition, all of your living expenses, and we will be securing you a private apartment near the campus. You are the future of this company," he continued, "and we want you to be able to focus entirely on preparing for that role." Ethan beamed, a radiant, triumphant smile spreading across his face as he nodded eagerly. "Thank you, Mom and Dad," he said, his voice brimming with excitement. "I promise I won't let you down." I sat there in stunned silence, waiting. I held my breath, hoping, praying that my father would now say something about my own tuition, about my future. Instead, he cleared his throat and turned his gaze on me. It felt like a physical blow. "As for Julian," he stated, his voice utterly flat, "you're smart. You'll figure it out." He paused, letting the words hang in the air between us. "We believe you are more than capable of securing scholarships or taking out student loans. If necessary, you can always work part-time. It will be a good experience for you. It will help you mature." I felt the blood turn to ice in my veins. My mother nodded in agreement, adding her own justification. "Julian, you've always been so independent," she said with a placid smile. "This is your chance to really prove it." I looked from my mother's face to my father's, then across the table at Ethan. He quickly lowered his gaze, a flicker of discomfort crossing his features, but he remained silent. He said nothing. A tidal wave of rage and betrayal crashed over me. I wanted to scream, to pound my fists on the polished wood of the table, to demand an answer to the question that had haunted my entire life. Why? Why do you treat me this way? But I didn't. Instead, I gave a single tight nod. "Yes," I whispered, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "I understand." Inside, the word backup echoed again, sharp and cruel as a shard of glass. I pushed my chair back from the table, mumbled an excuse, and fled to my room, the sound of their casual conversation fading behind me. The moment the door clicked shut behind me, my legs gave out. I slid down to the floor, my hands covering my face as hot, silent tears finally began to fall. It was never just about the money. I knew, even then, that I would find a way to pay for my own education. It was the crushing weight of their abandonment, the final, irrefutable confirmation that I was simply not worthy of the same effortless support, the same unconditional love that they gave so freely to Ethan. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat at my desk, the glow of my laptop screen illuminating my face in the darkness, and I began to fight. I searched for every scholarship, every grant, every bursary available to a student like me. I applied to dozens of programs, from prestigious merit-based awards to small, obscure funds for financially independent students. I did the math, the numbers stark and unforgiving on the screen. Stanford's tuition was roughly $50,000 a year, and that didn't even touch the cost of housing, books, or food. I calculated that with a partial scholarship and the maximum student loan I could secure, I could just barely make it work. But it would come at a steep price. It would mean working 20, maybe even 30 hours a week, all while maintaining the high GPA required to keep my scholarship from being revoked. I took out another piece of paper and wrote down a new plan, a survival guide for the next 4 years. Work, study, survive, never ever give up. I taped the note to the wall above my desk, right next to a faded photograph of me and Grandma Eleanor in Napa. In the picture, she's pointing out at the endless rows of vines, her face alight with a fierce pride. I could still hear her voice in my memory. "You're going to grow bigger than all of this, Julian. Just you wait." The summer before I left for Stanford, I returned to Napa to stay with Grandma Eleanor. Ethan, meanwhile, remained in San Francisco, embarking on a lavish, parent-funded trip through Europe with his friends. I spent my days in the quiet rhythm of the vineyard, helping my grandmother prune the vines, my hands growing calloused, my mind preparing for the grueling 4 years that lay ahead. One hot afternoon, as we sat on her porch sipping iced tea, she reached over and took my hand in hers. "Do you know why I love these grapevines so much?" she asked, her eyes fixed on the sprawling vineyard. I shook my head. "Because they have to struggle to grow," she explained, her voice soft but firm. "The soil here is rocky and difficult, but that forces their roots to dig deep, to fight for every single drop of water. It's the struggle that makes the wine so good. You're like that, Julian. Don't resent the struggle. Let it shape you. It's going to make you stronger than you can possibly imagine." Her words were a balm to my wounded spirit. I returned to San Francisco a week later with a new ironclad resolve. I immediately found a part-time job at another small fintech startup in Palo Alto, a 20-minute bus ride from the Stanford campus. The work wasn't glamorous, mostly data entry and basic analysis with the occasional coffee run for the senior engineers, but it paid $15 an hour. It was enough. It would be enough to cover my books and basic living expenses. It had to be. I also managed to secure a partial academic scholarship from Stanford, along with a low-interest student loan to cover the remaining tuition gap. I found a small room for rent in a crowded shared apartment with 3 other students, a world away from the upscale university-managed dorm where Ethan was living. My room was little more than a closet, barely large enough for a single bed, a rickety second-hand desk, and a tiny wardrobe. But I didn't care. It was mine. This was my start, my first step into a life I would build for myself, and I was determined to make every single second of it count. On my first day at Stanford, I walked into the main lecture hall feeling a dizzying mix of exhilaration and raw nerves. The iconic sandstone buildings, the sprawling, perfectly manicured lawns, the palpable energy of thousands of brilliant young minds. For the first time, I felt a sense of belonging. This was where I was meant to be. But I was also acutely aware of how different I was. While many of my classmates came from privileged backgrounds, their lives cushioned by family wealth, I found myself counting every penny, constantly weighing the choice between buying a necessary textbook or affording a proper meal. Ethan, of course, made a grand entrance. He showed up to his first classes in a brand new designer suit, driving the sleek Porsche our parents had gifted him. Within days, he had effortlessly established himself as the magnetic center of a large and influential social circle. He was thriving. I would sometimes hear him in the hallways boasting about extravagant dorm parties and lavish dates, and I would just force a smile, doing my best to hide the bitter sting of envy. But in the midst of all that struggle, Stanford gave me an unexpected, life-altering gift. I met Chloe. It happened in our Microeconomics 101 class. She slid into the seat next to mine and asked if she could borrow a pen. Chloe had bright blonde hair pulled back in a high ponytail, warm, intelligent brown eyes, and a smile so genuine it made me momentarily forget the crushing weight of my stress. "You look like you just ran a marathon to get here," she teased, noticing the beads of sweat on my forehead from my frantic bus ride from my job. I laughed, a real unforced laugh, and found myself telling her about my insane schedule. The juggling act of classes, work, and studying. She just listened, her expression open and free of judgment. We were assigned to a group project together that day, and I quickly discovered that Chloe wasn't just brilliant. She had a huge heart. She had grown up in a small, working-class town, had fought her way into Stanford on a full scholarship, and understood on a fundamental level what it meant to struggle and survive. She got it. She got me. Chloe became my first real friend at Stanford, my anchor in the storm. We formed a routine, studying together late into the night in the library, sharing cheap meals in the crowded cafeteria, and sometimes just sitting and talking for hours, laughing about our ridiculously ambitious dreams. "You're going to do incredible things, Julian," she told me one evening as we sat on the main lawn staring up at the vast, star-filled sky. "I can see it in the way you work. It's like you have this unstoppable fire inside you." I smiled, a real, genuine smile, and thought of Grandma Eleanor's words. Maybe they were both right. Maybe that fire really was burning inside me, and I made a silent vow to myself that I would never let anyone, not my parents, not the world, extinguish it. Meanwhile, Ethan didn't seem to be taking his studies seriously at all. He frequently skipped lectures, handed in assignments late, and seemed to spend the majority of his time networking and partying. I started to hear the whispers from our mutual classmates, the rumors that Ethan had only been admitted to Stanford because of our parents' influence and a hefty donation. The gossip made me feel a complicated mix of sadness and anger. I didn't want to see him fail. He was still my brother, but I couldn't deny the small, quiet flicker of satisfaction I felt every time our exam scores were posted, and mine eclipsed his. It was a petty feeling, I knew, but it was there. I pushed myself relentlessly, locked in a brutal cycle of studying, working, and meticulously paying off my loans. Every single night I would return to my tiny, cramped room and my eyes would land on that piece of paper I had taped to the wall. Work, study, survive, never ever give up. And I would tell myself over and over that this was only the beginning. Stanford was my battlefield and I was a soldier fighting without any fancy armor or inherited weapons. Every single day was a frantic race against the clock. My mornings were spent in lectures, my afternoons were a blur of work at the startup, and my nights bled into early mornings as I ground my way through assignments, fueled by cheap coffee and sheer willpower. My side of the shared room was a chaotic landscape of stacked textbooks, a blizzard of sticky notes covering every available surface, and a graveyard of cold coffee cups beside my laptop. But I grew to love that grueling rhythm. It made me feel alive, powerful, like I was fighting for something real, something that was entirely my own. Whenever the bone-deep exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me, whenever the temptation to just quit felt too strong, I would close my eyes and picture Grandma Eleanor's face, remembering the fierce pride in her eyes when I'd call to tell her about a project I was working on. And then I would think of my parents. I would hear my father's voice in my head calling me a backup. That was all the fuel I needed. That single word, backup, was like a needle constantly pricking at my pride, but instead of breaking me, it only drove me to push harder, to run faster, to climb higher. It was in my blockchain and financial risk management class that I finally found a place to truly shine. The professor, a brilliant, wiry man named Dr. Marcus Vance, would stand at the front of the lecture hall, his eyes alight with passion as he spoke about the revolutionary power of technology to reshape the entire landscape of modern finance. I always sat in the front row, my pen flying across the page as I scribbled notes, my heart pounding with excitement every time he posed a challenging question to the class. One day, he tasked us with analyzing the inherent risks of a new decentralized crypto trading platform. An idea sparked in my mind. For the next 3 days, I barely slept. I poured every spare moment into building a predictive risk model, using real-time market data I had access to through my job at the startup. When it was my turn to present, I walked to the front of the room, my hands shaking slightly as I plugged in my laptop. As I walked the class through my analysis, a hush fell over the room. When I finished, Dr. Vance just stood there for a moment, nodding slowly. Then the corner of his mouth twitched into a small, rare smile. "Mr. Hayes," he said, his voice carrying across the silent room. "That is truly outstanding work. I'd like you to see me after class." That one meeting changed the entire trajectory of my life. Dr. Vance became my mentor. He didn't just teach me about financial theory. He taught me how to think strategically, how to anticipate market shifts, and how to view failure not as an endpoint, but as an invaluable lesson. "You have something that can't be taught in a classroom, Julian," he told me one afternoon in his office, looking me straight in the eye. "It's resilience, a rare and powerful quality, but be careful not to let your drive become a self-destructive obsession. Use that fire to build something great." I nodded, a profound sense of warmth spreading through my chest. For the first time, I felt a sense of true, earned recognition, not from my parents, not as a comparison to Ethan, but from someone I deeply respected, someone who saw my actual worth. Chloe's friendship was just as indispensable. She was more than just a study partner. She was the person who kept me grounded, who kept me sane on the days when I was running on nothing but caffeine and fumes. I remember one time I nearly collapsed in the library after pulling 3 all-nighters in a row to finish a project. Chloe appeared out of nowhere with a hot coffee and a protein bar. "Julian," she said, poking my arm gently, "are you trying to break Elon Musk's record for most consecutive sleepless hours?" I actually laughed, a real laugh for the first time all week. Our bond deepened, evolving far beyond shared homework assignments. We became a true team, tackling challenging group projects together, debating the future of fintech over cheap meals from the food trucks that lined the edge of campus. Chloe just had this incredible way of making everything feel lighter, more manageable. Even when I was stressed to my absolute breaking point, when my anxiety about applying for Stanford's prestigious fintech innovation competition became paralyzing, she was the one who physically dragged me out to the main campus lawn and made me lie down on the grass next to her, staring up at the clouds. "Just breathe, Julian," she said softly. "You've already accomplished more than almost anyone else here. You just need to trust yourself." I closed my eyes, feeling the cool, damp grass beneath me, and for the first time in what felt like months, I felt a wave of genuine relief wash over me. I decided to enter the competition. That fintech competition became another major turning point. My pitch was for a new blockchain-based trading platform designed specifically to reduce transaction costs for small-scale, everyday investors. I poured every ounce of my energy into it, working day and night on the coding, building the financial models, and rehearsing my presentation with Chloe, who helped me polish every slide and talking point. After months of relentless preparation and execution, I won first place. The prize was more than just the $10,000 in cash. It included a coveted internship at one of the leading fintech companies in the Bay Area. The news spread across campus like wildfire. Suddenly, I felt visible. My classmates started to see me differently, not as Ethan's quiet, studious twin, but as Julian Hayes, the guy who had won the innovation competition. While I was finally finding my footing, Ethan was spiraling. He started missing major assignment deadlines. His grades took a nosedive, and he even received a formal academic warning from a professor for submitting a plagiarized essay. I heard through the campus grapevine that he was spending most of his weekends at lavish parties in San Francisco, cruising around in his Porsche and bragging to anyone who would listen about his guaranteed future as the CEO of Hayes Global Investments. By my junior year, I was hitting my stride. I dove into advanced courses in blockchain technology, artificial intelligence, and quantitative risk management, earning top marks in nearly every class. Dr. Vance invited me to join his exclusive research group, where I developed a new algorithm for predicting market volatility with unprecedented accuracy. My responsibilities at the startup grew as well. I was promoted from simple data entry to performing complex data analysis and even proposing major system improvements. Every month, I would send a small but significant portion of my paycheck directly to my student loan provider, slowly but surely chipping away at the mountain of debt. And even though my bank account was always hovering near empty, I felt a profound sense of freedom. It was the freedom that comes from knowing you are building your own future, brick by painful brick, relying on no one but yourself. But not every day was a victory. The pressure was immense. There were nights I'd lie awake, my chest tight with anxiety, suffocated by the overwhelming pressure of balancing my job and my demanding course load, wondering if I truly had the stamina to see it all through. One evening, I received a rare email from my parents. It was a brief, perfunctory message, a hollow check-in that ended with a casual reminder to be sure to support Ethan if he needs it. A hot surge of anger rose in my throat, and I deleted the email without replying. They still didn't see me. They had no idea what I was accomplishing, what I was enduring. But then I thought of Chloe. I thought of Dr. Vance. I thought of Grandma Eleanor. They saw me, and more importantly, I was finally starting to see myself, to recognize my own worth, independent of my family's validation. As senior year drew closer, I knew a major milestone was on the horizon, graduation. But I didn't just want to graduate. I wanted to do it with my head held high, to walk across that stage and prove to the world once and for all that I, Julian Hayes, was nobody's backup plan. I wanted my parents to see it. I wanted Ethan to see it, but most of all, I needed to know deep in my own soul that every drop of sweat, every sleepless night, every sacrifice had been worth it. And then finally the day arrived. The graduation ceremony was held on a brilliant, sun-drenched day in early summer, right in the heart of the Stanford campus. The campus was bathed in a warm, golden light. Graduation caps sailed through the air like a flock of dark birds as my fellow students tossed them skyward in celebration. I stood in the long procession line, my black gown billowing around me, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I had fought tooth and nail to get to this moment. I had earned a perfect 4.0 GPA, won the FinTech Innovation Award, and was graduating summa cum laude as the valedictorian of my class. But it wasn't just those achievements that had my nerves frayed. Today I had been invited to deliver the commencement address, an honor so far beyond my wildest dreams that it still felt surreal. And I knew with a gut-wrenching certainty that my parents and Ethan were out there sitting somewhere in that vast crowd. I had spent weeks preparing my speech, writing and rewriting every line, each word feeling like a chisel chipping away at the heavy stone of my past, at the years I had been dismissed as the backup. Chloe had helped me rehearse, sitting patiently in my cramped little room listening to me practice and offering gentle feedback. "You just have to speak your truth, Julian," she had told me, her eyes shining with encouragement. "Don't do it for revenge. Do it to finally tell your own story, to show them who you really are." I had nodded in agreement, but deep down I knew this speech was more than just my story. It was a declaration of independence, a statement that I had not only reached but far surpassed the limitations that others had tried to impose upon me. As I stepped up to the podium on the stage, the collective weight of thousands of expectant eyes settled on me. The university's cameras zoomed in, and my face, magnified and projected onto the massive screens on either side of the stage, looked back at me clad in the formal graduation gown. I took a slow, deep breath and scanned the sea of faces in the audience. There, in the front row, I saw Chloe, her smile as brilliant as the summer sun. Sitting next to her was Grandma Eleanor, a striking figure in a red silk scarf, her eyes gleaming with an unmistakable pride that reached me even from that distance. And then, further back in the crowd, I spotted them. My parents seated on either side of Ethan. My father sat ramrod straight, his expression severe and unreadable. My mother was fussing with her shawl, a nervous gesture I knew well. Ethan kept his head bowed, his gaze fixed on the program in his lap, deliberately avoiding my eyes. The university president stepped up to the microphone to introduce me. "Julian Hayes," he announced, his voice booming across the lawn. "The valedictorian of this year's graduating class, a young man who has funded his own education while achieving extraordinary success in the field of financial technology." A wave of polite applause rippled through the audience, but even from the stage I could hear the faint, sharp whispers coming from my parents' section. I knew they hadn't expected this. I knew they hadn't known the full extent of my struggle, that I had paid for every single cent of my education, from tuition to rent to food, while they had poured a fortune into Ethan's effortless college experience. The president continued, "Julian will now share some of his journey with us, a story of remarkable perseverance and passion." I walked to the microphone, my hands trembling slightly on the polished wood, but when I spoke, my voice was steadier than I could have hoped. "Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed faculty, proud families, and my fellow graduates," I began, my voice echoing through the massive speakers. 4 years ago, when I first set foot on this campus, I had almost nothing to my name but a powerful dream and a small piece of paper taped to my bedroom wall. It had just 5 words written on it: work, study, survive, never give up. I came here without any financial support or recognition from my family, I continued, my voice gaining strength. I came here with only the unwavering belief that my worth would not be defined by the expectations of others, but by what I could build with my own two hands. I paused, taking another deep breath, letting the words settle. The entire audience was completely silent, the only sound the gentle rustle of the breeze through the trees. I worked 30 hours a week to survive, Nay, I said, my voice clear and strong. I took out student loans and paid them back, month by month. I lived in a tiny, cramped room with 3 other students. There were countless nights I didn't sleep. Not because I was out at parties, but because I had an assignment due, a project to finish, a promise to myself that I had to keep. I had to prove to myself above all that I was worthy of being here. I let that hang in the air for a moment before delivering the final blow. My parents once told me that I was their backup son. They said I lacked the qualities of a leader, but I am not standing here today to prove them wrong. I am here to tell every single one of you this. True, lasting success doesn't come from a silver spoon or a safety net. It is forged in the fire of adversity. It comes from the unshakable resolve to shatter the limits that other people try to set for you. The silence broke, and the audience erupted into a thunderous wave of applause. I looked out over the crowd and saw Chloe wiping tears from her eyes, a proud, beaming smile on her face. I saw Grandma Eleanor clapping with all her might, her smile stretching from ear to ear. But my gaze inevitably found its way to my family. My father sat completely frozen, his face ashen. My mother was clutching Ethan's hand, her eyes wide with shock as if she'd been physically struck. And Ethan was finally looking at me, and for the first time in years, his expression held none of his usual breezy confidence. It was replaced by a look of profound unease and something that looked startlingly like shame. I felt no glee at their discomfort, only a deep, shuddering sense of release, as if a massive boulder that had been crushing my chest for 2 decades had finally, blessedly, been rolled away. The moment I stepped off the stage, Chloe ran up and threw her arms around me, hugging me tightly. "You did it, Julian," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You really did it." Grandma Eleanor was next, pulling me into a fierce, wiry embrace. "You are my fire, Julian," she murmured into my ear. I smiled, tears finally streaming down my face, but for the first time in my life, they weren't tears of pain or frustration. They were tears of pure, unadulterated release. I learned later that Ethan had graduated with a 2.8 GPA, just barely scraping by to meet the minimum requirements for his degree. He wasn't on any honors list, he had no awards. He certainly hadn't received an invitation to speak. I didn't see my parents at all after the ceremony. They had left early, slipping away without a single word. Chloe told me later that she had seen my mother wiping away tears in the parking lot as my father got into the car and drove away in stony silence. I couldn't know what they were feeling in that moment. Shame, perhaps, or regret. Or maybe it was just raw anger at having their private truths laid bare for hundreds of strangers to witness. But as I stood there in the sunlight, surrounded by the people who truly loved me, I realized something profound. I no longer cared. That day I finally understood that I didn't need their approval or their validation to feel whole. That evening, Chloe hosted a small party at her off-campus apartment. It was just me, her, Grandma Eleanor, and a few of our closest friends from our classes. We drank cheap beer, laughed until our sides ached, and sang terrible karaoke late into the night. It was perfect. After everyone else had gone home, Chloe and I sat out on her small balcony, gazing at the glittering lights of Palo Alto spread out below us. "Do you see it, Julian?" she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. "You did what no one thought you could do, and this is just the beginning for you." I nodded, my hand finding hers in the darkness. For the first time in my entire life, I didn't feel like Julian Hayes, the overlooked twin. I was Julian Hayes, the man who had conquered his own demons and forged his own destiny. About a week after graduation, Chloe called and asked me to meet her at a small, unassuming coffee shop in the heart of Silicon Valley. The kind of place where billion-dollar ideas were famously scribbled on the backs of napkins. She slid a crisp business card across the table toward me, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Apex Digital Capital," she said, her voice filled with anticipation. "They heard about your FinTech award and your graduation speech. They want to meet with you. This is huge, Julian." Apex, the name alone made my heart race. In the hyper-competitive world of FinTech, Apex was a rapidly ascending star, a young, agile, and fiercely ambitious company that was seen as a direct and growing threat to established giants like my family's firm, Hayes Global Investments. I knew that my father, Robert, viewed Apex as a persistent thorn in his side. I had heard him grumbling for years about their aggressive, dirty tactics for stealing market share. But I also knew that Apex was doing what my family's company was too complacent and too arrogant to do. They were investing heavily in the future, pouring resources into blockchain technology and artificial intelligence, the very fields I had poured my blood, sweat, and tears into mastering at Stanford. I picked up the business card, the smooth, heavy stock cool against my fingertips, and I nodded. "Okay," I said, my voice firm. "I'll take the meeting." The interview at Apex was unlike anything I had ever experienced before. Their headquarters were located in a sleek, modern glass tower in downtown San Francisco, a stunning building with living green walls and vast, open-plan spaces flooded with natural light. I walked in wearing my only suit, a cheap, ill-fitting one I'd bought at a discount store, and was ushered into a conference room to meet with 3 people: the head of strategy, the chief technology officer, and a man I would later learn was David Sterling, the formidable chairman of Apex Digital Capital. They didn't ask me about my GPA or my academic awards. They didn't care about my family name. Instead, they grilled me about my ideas. They wanted to know every detail about the blockchain platform I had pitched at the competition. They wanted to know how I saw the future of finance evolving over the next decade. I found myself speaking with a passion and confidence that surprised even me, my nervousness melting away as if I had been born to be in that room debating those ideas. When the interview finally concluded, David Sterling smiled, a genuine, assessing smile, and extended his hand across the table. "Welcome to Apex, Julian," he said. "We need people like you here." I accepted the role of strategy specialist at Apex without a moment's hesitation, which meant I was able to formally turn down the reluctant, half-hearted offer my father had extended a few days prior. He had summoned me to his opulent office at Hayes Global Investments, a space that always smelled of polished mahogany and expensive coffee, a place that had always made me feel small and out of place. "Julian," he had said, his voice flat and devoid of any real pride. "You did well at Stanford. We have an opening in the analytics department if you're interested." I had looked at him, at the man who had dismissed me as a backup plan my entire life, and I had simply shaken my head. "Thank you, Dad," I said, my voice even, "but I've already chosen my own path." He had frowned, a look of genuine confusion on his face, as if he simply could not fathom why anyone would reject such a generous favor from him. But I didn't need his pity, not anymore. I had finally found the place where I belonged. My first few years at Apex were a relentless, exhilarating whirlwind. I was working alongside some of the most brilliant minds in Silicon Valley, people who didn't give a damn about my family name or where I came from. They only cared about the quality of my ideas and the results I could deliver. My very first assignment was to lead the development of a new blockchain-based trading platform, an expansion of the core concept from my award-winning thesis. I spent every day in a state of intense focus, sitting in my open-plan workspace surrounded by 3 massive computer monitors. writing code, analyzing terabytes of data, and engaging in passionate whiteboard-fueled debates with our top engineers about system architecture and optimization. I worked late into the night, but not because I was under pressure from my bosses. I did it because I was completely and utterly obsessed with the work. I was driven by the pure, unadulterated thrill of knowing that every line of code I wrote, every strategic decision I made, had the potential to fundamentally reshape how millions of people interacted with the financial markets. Within 18 months, Apex's new blockchain platform, which we called Catalyst, launched to immediate and overwhelming success. It became a phenomenon. We had managed to slash transaction costs to levels previously thought impossible, attracting millions of new users to the platform, from first-time individual investors to major institutional funds. Major articles in TechCrunch and Forbes heralded it as a fintech revolution, and my name was mentioned in a feature interview as the strategic mind behind the project. Apex's valuation soared. We climbed from a top 5 player to the undisputed #1 in the global fintech rankings, officially surpassing my family's empire, Hayes Global Investments. I can still remember the exact moment the new rankings were officially announced. I was sitting at my desk, casually checking my morning emails, when a colleague came over and slapped me on the shoulder, pointing excitedly at his monitor. "Julian, have you seen this?" he shouted. "We did it! We beat Hayes!" I stared at the numbers on the screen, my heart hammering in my chest. Hayes Global Investments, the company my father had built, the empire he had always intended for Ethan to inherit, was now officially #2. We were #1. I didn't call my parents to gloat. I didn't need to. I knew without a doubt that they had seen the news. But a week later, something completely unexpected happened. My father called me. His voice, when I answered, was thin and trembling, a sound I had never heard from him before. "Julian," he said, the word catching in his throat. "We need to talk. The company, it's struggling. We need your help. We need you." I sat there in my small apartment, the phone pressed to my ear, gazing out at the glittering panorama of the San Francisco skyline, and a complex, overwhelming wave of emotions washed over me. A bitter part of me wanted to laugh at the sheer, stunning irony of it all, that they only remembered my existence, only saw my value when their own precious empire began to crumble. But mostly what I felt was a profound, hollow emptiness. "Dad," I said, my voice surprisingly calm and steady, "Apex saw my value from the very beginning. That's something you never did." I hung up the phone before he could reply. Ethan, I knew, was now working at Hayes Global Investments, but things were not going well for him. I had heard through industry contacts that he had been given a senior managerial role, but lacking any real discipline or practical experience. He was floundering, making one costly mistake after another. One day, Chloe forwarded me a link to an industry news article detailing a minor scandal at Hayes. A major project that Ethan had been leading had failed spectacularly, costing the company millions of dollars in losses. Reading it, I didn't feel a shred of triumph. I just felt a deep, weary sense of pity for him, for the golden opportunities he had so carelessly squandered. At Apex, I just kept pushing forward. I was promoted to head of strategy, leading a brilliant team tasked with developing our next generation of disruptive fintech products. Every single day, I could feel myself growing stronger, more resilient, just like the grapevines Grandma Eleanor had told me about all those years ago. My roots were digging deep and I was thriving, not in spite of the barren soil I had started from, but because of it. And Chloe, my constant source of support and love, was always there, right by my side. She had become an inseparable, essential part of my life. One evening, as we were taking a walk along the waterfront near the bay, she stopped and took my hand, her expression suddenly serious. "Julian," she said, her voice quiet, "there's something I need to tell you." My heart started to race as I looked at her, a dozen worst-case scenarios flashing through my mind. "What is it?" She took a deep breath, and then a small, nervous smile touched her lips. "I'm David Sterling's daughter," she said, "the chairman of Apex." Her words hit me like a physical shockwave. I just stood there, completely frozen, trying to process what she had just said. Chloe, my best friend, my confidant, the woman who had shared cheap cafeteria meals with me and held me together when I was falling apart, was the daughter of the chairman of Apex. For a terrifying second, a sliver of doubt pierced my mind. Was this all a setup? Was she using me? Had she been sent to get close to me to somehow undermine my family's company? But then I looked deep into her eyes and I saw nothing but the same raw sincerity I had always seen there. I remembered every single moment we had shared, every late-night study session, every shared laugh, every quiet moment of support. Chloe had never done a single thing to hurt me. She had only ever lifted me up. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked, my voice still a little shaky. She shrugged, her smile softening. "I needed you to see me as just Chloe," she explained, "not as someone's daughter, and more than anything, I wanted you to succeed on your own terms for you, not because you were connected to my dad." I nodded slowly as her words sank in, the last vestiges of my shock and suspicion dissolving into understanding. And then, I pulled her into a tight hug. "Thank you, Chloe," I whispered into her hair. For everything, I repeated. She just smiled and squeezed my hand. In that one simple moment, I knew that what we had between us had grown far beyond friendship. Something deeper, more profound was taking root, but I wasn't quite ready to put a name to it yet. Apex continued its meteoric rise, and Chloe, who had recently joined the company as a junior analyst, became my perfect professional partner. We worked together seamlessly, our minds seemingly in sync as we developed and pitched new strategies that consistently impressed our teams and the board. Apex's revenue continued to skyrocket, leaving Hayes Global Investments further and further behind in our wake. Each new victory, each successful product launch was another confirmation of what I now knew to be true. I didn't need my parents' approval to succeed. I had forged my own worth, and I was building a future that I was intensely proud of. 2 years after I first walked through the doors of Apex, I proposed to Chloe. I didn't choose a fancy restaurant or plan some over-the-top, extravagant gesture. Instead, I took her back to Napa Valley, to Grandma Eleanor's house, the one place on earth where I had always felt safe and loved. Under the sprawling branches of an ancient oak tree at the edge of the vineyard, just as the setting sun bathed the entire valley in a soft, golden light, I got down on one knee and took her hand in mine. "Chloe," I began, my voice trembling with emotion, "you were with me through my absolute worst days, and you make every single day of my life better just by being in it. I want to spend the rest of my life trying to make you as happy as you make me. Will you marry me?" She burst into happy tears, nodding her head so vigorously her hair flew around her face and pulled me up into a fierce, tight embrace. "Yes, Julian," she whispered, "1,000 times yes." Our wedding was held in Napa, in a breathtakingly beautiful vineyard surrounded by lush green vines heavy with ripe clusters of grapes. It was a perfect summer afternoon. The sunlight filtered gently through the leaves of the trees, casting shimmering, dancing patterns on the ground. Chloe wore a simple, elegant white wedding dress, her blonde hair flowing freely down her back. She looked like something out of a dream. I stood at the altar in a custom-tailored suit, the first truly luxurious thing I had ever bought for myself, feeling as if my heart might actually burst with pure, unadulterated happiness. Grandma Eleanor, wearing her signature red silk scarf, sat in the front row, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Just before the ceremony began, David Sterling, Chloe's father, came over and clapped me firmly on the shoulder, his voice filled with genuine warmth. "You're a good man, Julian," he said, his eyes meeting mine. "I'm proud to have you as my son-in-law." Dr. Vance was there too. He offered me one of his rare, genuine smiles and said, "You've come a very long way, Julian, a very long way indeed." I had sent invitations to my parents and to Ethan, though I honestly wasn't sure if they would show up. A small, stubborn part of me still hoped they would come, not so I could flaunt my success in their faces, but so they could finally see the man I had become, the life I had built. But as the ceremony was about to begin, I scanned the rows of guests and saw no sign of them. Chloe gently squeezed my hand, whispering, "Don't worry, Julian, today is about us." I nodded, turning my focus back to her, to this perfect, sacred moment. As we exchanged our vows, I looked deep into Chloe's eyes and saw my entire world reflected there. A world where I was no longer a backup. A world where I was cherished, valued, and loved for exactly who I was. The reception was a joyous outdoor feast. Long wooden tables draped in white linen were set up under the stars, with strings of glowing lanterns hanging from the trees above. A soft jazz trio played in the background, their music floating on the warm evening air. We cut our wedding cake. We had our first dance as husband and wife under the star-dusted sky, and we laughed and celebrated with all of our friends and colleagues from Apex. Grandma Eleanor regaled the guests with embarrassing stories from my childhood, making everyone roar with laughter. David Sterling raised a glass and a toast, calling me the man who helped make Apex #1. I looked around at all the smiling faces, Chloe, Grandma Eleanor, Dr. Vance, my colleagues from Apex, and I had a sudden, powerful realization. This was my true family, not the one I had been born into, but the one I had chosen, the one I had built for myself. That moment wasn't just about celebrating our love, it was a declaration. I had surpassed my family's legacy not just by pushing Apex to the top of the industry, but by building a rich, meaningful life entirely on my own terms. The fact that Chloe was David Sterling's daughter only added a delicious layer of irony to the narrative. I hadn't just beaten Hayes Global Investments in the marketplace. I had become a part of their biggest rival's family. But it wasn't about revenge. It was about victory. It was the ultimate victory of a boy who was once overlooked, once dismissed as a backup, who was now standing tall, secure in his own skin and his own success. After our honeymoon, Chloe and I returned to our work at Apex, where we continued to be an unstoppable team. We spearheaded new projects together, from developing innovative, sustainable investment platforms to creating powerful new financial literacy tools for everyday users. Apex's revenue and influence continued to soar, while Hayes Global Investments, I later heard, had slipped to third place in the industry rankings, a distant shadow of its former glory. I stopped actively following the news about my family's company, but I would occasionally hear whispers through the industry grapevine. Ethan had finally left Hayes after a string of high-profile failures, and my parents were reportedly scrambling to salvage what was left of their crumbling empire. One evening, as Chloe and I were sitting in our new San Francisco apartment, a beautiful, cozy space with huge windows overlooking the bay, she turned to me and asked a question I had been subconsciously dreading. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. "Not going back to work at Hayes?" I shook my head without a moment's hesitation, taking her hand in mine. "Never," I said, my voice firm with conviction. "Because I found where I truly belong, with you, with Apex, and most importantly, with myself." She smiled, a slow, contented smile, and rested her head on my shoulder. And in that quiet, perfect moment, I knew with absolute certainty that every hardship, every sleepless night, every ounce of pain, and every drop of sweat, it had all been worth it.